Hello students, welcome back. So we've seen the timeline for section 2 and we've also done an introduction to this entire section. We know this section's theme is empire. So today we will start the third chapter, an empire across 3 continents. Okay, so we are going to talk about this Roman Empire, which covered a wide stretch of territory. It included most of Europe that we know today, a large part of the Fertile Crescent, and also North Africa. We will look in this chapter the way the empire was organized, the political forces that shaped its destiny, the social groups into which people were divided, and we will see that the empire embraced a wealth of local cultures and languages. Women had a stronger legal position that time than many women in many countries have even today. Most of the economy was run on slave labor, that is denying freedom to substantial number of people. 5th century onwards, the empire fell apart, but the West remained intact and exceptionally prosperous than the eastern half. We will learn about caliphate in the next chapter, but this caliphate was built on this prosperity and inherited the urban and religious traditions. So this is about Rome. Rome dominated the Mediterranean and the regions up to the north as well as to the south of the sea. To the north, the empire boundaries were formed by 2 great rivers, Rhine and Danube, and to the south, there was a huge expanse of the Sahara Desert. This is the Roman Empire that we will be studying about in this chapter. We will also do a comparative study about Iran, but we will be focusing majorly on the Roman Empire. Roman historians have a rich collection of sources. Okay, and these sources can be divided broadly into 3 groups: text, documents, and material remains. The textual sources, they include the history of the period written by the contemporaries. These contemporaries, or these histories that were written down by the contemporaries, were also called annals because they were written down on a year-to-year basis. There are also many letters, speeches, sermons, laws, etc., which are the text which we have found, which is a good resource to know the history. Documentary resources include inscriptions and papyri. Inscriptions were usually cut on stone, and so a large number has survived in both Greek as well as in Latin. The papyrus was a reed-like plant that grew across the Nile in Egypt, and this was processed to produce writing material that was widely used in the everyday life. Next, thousands of contracts, accounts, letters, official documents survive on papyrus, and they have been published by scholars who are now called papyrologists. There are also material remains, that is wide assortment of items that archaeologists have discovered through excavation and field study. There is buildings, monuments, and other kind of structures pottery, coins, mosaic, even landscapes with the use of aerial photography. Each of these sources tells us only a little about the past, but when they are combined, it's a fruitful exercise and we know quite a lot. So these are the papyrus scripts that we found. These are the archaeological remains. We found public baths and amphitheaters and so many other things. This is an amphorae. So the two most powerful empires that ruled between the birth of Christ and the early part of 7th century, that is till 630 CE, that's Common Era, the two empires that ruled were Rome and Iran. The Romans and the Iranians were rivals and they fought against each other for most of the history. These empires lay next to each other and they were separated only by a narrow strip of land that ran across the river Euphrates. So they were rivals and they fought against each other. Okay. Now in your textbook, there is a map. If you look at that map, you will see that the continents of Europe and Africa are separated by a sea that stretches all the way from Spain to West Syria in the east. And this sea is called the Mediterranean Sea. This Mediterranean Sea, it was the heart of the Rome Empire, and Rome dominated the Mediterranean and all the regions around that sea in all the directions. So in north as well as the south of that sea, Rome was dominating the empire. To the north, the boundary of the empire was formed by two great rivers, Dhine, Rhine and Danube. And to the south, you know, there was a huge expansion of a desert called the Sahara Desert. This vast stretch of territory was the Roman Empire. So what did the Iranians do? Now the Iranians, they controlled the entire area to the south of the Caspian Sea, right up till Arabia, and also a large part of Afghanistan. These two superpowers had divided up most of the world. Okay, so this is the Rhine River and the Danube River. So to the north, the Roman empires, the boundary was formed by two rivers, Rhine and Danube. And to the south of Caspian Sea was the Iranian Empire. Now the Roman Empire can broadly be divided into two phases, early and late. They are divided by the 3rd century. The whole period with the main part of the 3rd century is called the early empire, and the period after that is the late empire. Okay, so there are two phases of the Roman Empire, early empire and the late empire. The major difference between these two superpowers was that the Roman Empire was culturally much more diverse than that of Iran. In Iran, the Parthians and later the Sasanians, the dynasties that ruled Iran, only ruled over a population that was largely Iranian only. But in the Roman Empire, it was a mosaic of territories and cultures. Okay, and they were all bounded together by a common system of government. So Romans had much more diverse cultures in it, and Iranians were all Iranians only. Many languages were spoken in Rome, but for the purpose of administration, only Latin and Greek were used. The upper class of the East spoke and wrote in Greek, and those in the West used Latin. The boundary between these two broad languages ran somewhere across the middle of the Mediterranean between the African provinces of Tripolitania and Phrynicia. All those who lived in the empire were subject to one single leader, regardless of where they lived or what language they spoke. They were all subject to a single ruler, and that was the emperor. The regime that was established by Augustus, who was the first emperor in 27 BCE, was called the Principate. Although Augustus was the sole ruler and the only real source of authority, there was a fiction kept alive that he was actually only a leading citizen and not an absolute ruler. This fiction was kept alive out of respect of the Senate. Senate is a body that controlled Rome earlier in the days when it was the principal. It was the republic. Republic was the name of a regime in which the reality of power lay with the Senate. And Senate is a body of a small group of wealthy families who formed the nobility. Membership of Senate was for life, and wealth and office holding accounted for more than birth. Republic represented the government of nobility, and it was exercised through a body called Senate. The Republic lasted from 509 before Christ to 27 before Christ. And that time it was overthrown by Octavian, who was the adopted son and the heir to Julius Caesar. And later on, Octavian changed his name to Augustus. Okay, so that was Republic. And because of that Senate, out of the respect of the Senate, it was told that Augustus was only a leading citizen and he was not an absolute power. Now, the Senate had existed in Rome for centuries, and it had been and remained a body representing the aristocracy, that is, the wealthiest families of Rome and Italian descent, mainly the landowners. Most of the Roman histories that have survived were written by people from a senatorial background. And so, through these, it is clear that the emperors were judged according to their behavior towards the Senate. So, because most of the history that we have is written by the senators, and the senators would judge the empire depending on the behavior the empire did with the Senate. So, the worst emperors would be the ones who were hostile to the Senate, who behaved with suspicion or brutality and violence. And that's why so many senators wished to go back to the time of the Republic. That's when they had the most power. But they realized that it was impossible. Okay. So next, there were three main pillars of the political history. The first one is the emperor, who was also known as Principate. Then was the Senate. And then came the army. Now, Romans had a paid professional army, and soldiers had to put in a minimum of 25 years of service. But their rivals, the Persians, they had a conscripted army. Conscripted is an army where people are forcibly recruited. That is, military service is compulsory for certain groups or categories of population. The Persians had a conscripted army, whereas, I'm sorry, yeah, whereas the Romans had a paid professional army. And this was a distinctive feature of the Roman Empire. The army was the largest single organized body in the empire, and it had the power to determine the fate of emperors. The soldiers would constantly agitate for better wages and for better service conditions, and these agitations normally took form of mutinies. If the soldiers felt let down by their generals or the emperors, they formed mutinies. So the Senate hated and feared this army because it was a source of unpredictable violence. And especially in the 3rd century, government was forced to put more taxes, because of the mounting military expenditure. At that time, these armies were very, very agile. Okay, so they would form mutinies very much. So in this tense environment of the 3rd century, Senate was more fearful of the army. So basically, there were 3 pillars: emperor, Senate, and then the army. So the success of emperors depended on their control of the army, and whenever the armies were divided, it resulted in a civil war. This is the Senate, a group of nobility. This is the army. So whenever this army was divided, it resulted in a civil war, and civil war is any armed struggle for power within the same country. Okay, a war is normally with another country, but a civil war is when it happens within the country. So whenever the army was divided, it led to civil war. Succession to throne was based mainly on the family descent. It was either natural or adoptive, did not matter. And even the army was strongly wedded to this concept. Okay, so we had Tiberius, that was the second in the line of Roman emperors. He was not a natural son of Augustus, but he was adopted only to ensure smooth transition. The external warfare was very less in the first 2 centuries. When the empire was inherited by Tiberius from Augustus, it was so vast, it was already so vast that there felt no reason to expand it any further. The Augustan age is often remembered for its peace. Okay, now there was only one major campaign uh, or military campaign for expansion that was done by Trajan. It was fruitless and it was even abandoned by his successors. That was the only uh, effort to expand, and it was also fruitless in nature. This is Augustus Caesar, and this is his son Tiberius. He was adopted. Okay, so that will bring us to the end of this section, this part, this topic. These are a few questions I want you all to note down in your notebooks. throw some light on the geographical situation of Rome and its influence on her civilization. So over here, you will note down the geographical extent of Rome. You will also write how that helped in the civilization. Every country is affected by its geographical situation. Okay, so with Rome, what was it and how did it affect its civilization? Next is what resources can we know through which we know about the Roman Empire. Over here, you will talk about the sources. Okay, the three groups. Then is what is papyrus? It's the stem of a water plant used to prepare material for writing. Romans used to write on it. It is just like paper. And this plant grew on the banks of river Nile. Okay, so last is who are the major players of the political history of Roman Empire. You all know there were three major players. Okay, so the three major players were the emperor, the senate, and the army. All right. So these three questions you all can write in detail. Okay. With this, we end today's class. Stay home, stay safe, take care, and keep learning.